I'm Nicole Wallace. Let's get right to the week's top stories. The extraordinary moment when Donald Trump went from disgraced, twice impeached, 4 times indicted ex-president liable for sexual abuse and defamation to suddenly, in an instance, disgraced, convicted, twice impeached, 4 times indicted ex-president liable for sexual abuse and defamation is just the beginning of the beginning, the start of a long legal odyssey for Donald Trump. And because the Republican Party has followed him willingly down the rabbit hole toward autocracy, the country now has to grapple with it as well. Having already spent the trial in an environment completely out of his control, defendant Donald Trump will now be subject to the rules, the demands and the processes of the criminal justice system, just like any other American citizen who's been convicted of a felony. His right to vote, even on a ballot that bears his name, is likely to survive only because of a quirk of the law in his current home state of Florida. Washington Post reporting this, quote, if the former president had been convicted in Republican-dominated Florida or most other states, he wouldn't be allowed to vote this fall as he seeks to unseat President Biden. But Trump was convicted in New York, a Democrat-run state where felon voting laws are more lenient. Under Florida law, residents convicted of crimes in other states lose their ability to vote in Florida only if they are barred from voting in the state where they committed their offenses. In New York, where Trump was convicted, felons are barred from voting only while they are incarcerated. Earlier today, the convict returned to the scene of the crime, Trump Tower, where he and David Pecker of Michael Cohen hatched that plan to suppress stories that could have endangered his standing with voters ahead of the 2016 election. The ex-president predictably ranted and raved, saying he will appeal. He attacked witness Michael Cohen, a potential violation of the gag order, which is, as of right now, still in place. He also attacked the judge, Judge Juan Merchan, who literally holds Trump's fate in his hands. The judge set to sentence the ex-president on July 11th. That's just 4 days ahead of the start of the Republican convention. Republicans will nominate Donald Trump for a 3rd time. One complicating factor, the fact that he is running for president in no small part because he sees taking the White House as a way out of his legal challenges. But even that is not a way out for Trump in this case. New York Times reports this, quote, the proceedings will continue even if he wins. Because it's a state case, not federal, Trump would have no power as president to pardon himself. It's all part of how the American system of justice works, according to President Joe Biden. Here's what he had to say about the verdict.
Donald Trump was given every opportunity to defend himself. It was a state case, not a federal case. And it was heard by a jury of 12 citizens, 12 Americans, 12 people like you, like millions of Americans who served on juries. This jury is chosen the same way every jury in America is chosen. It was a process that Donald Trump's attorney was part of. The jury heard 5 weeks of evidence, 5 weeks. And after careful deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. And it's reckless, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible for anyone to say this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict. Our justice system has endured for nearly 250 years, and it literally is the cornerstone of America, our justice system. The justice system should be respected, and we should never allow anyone to tear it down. It's as simple as that. That's America. That's who we are, and that's who we'll always be, God willing.
The aftermath of the Trump election interference hush money trial ending in the first ever conviction of a former American president is where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. They have been with us since the start of this trial. MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissman is here. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard joins us at the table today. New York Times investigative reporter Suzanne Craig is back with us. And former U.S. Attorney, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman is here. Vaughn, it strikes me that Joe Biden said that as someone whose son is currently embroiled in the federal criminal justice system. I mean, he's not someone, and they're not a family, who isn't also facing accountability. The difference between the Bidens and the Trumps is that one of them seems willing to accept and live with the rule of law, and the other is now actively running as president against it.
his own son's trial is beginning next week. A Democratic U.S. senator is in the midst of a trial. A Democratic congressman just got issued an indictment as well. That is the Department of Justice at work under the Biden administration. And for Joe Biden, who has kept his remarks about this trial to a minimum throughout this, when Kelly O'Donnell, our colleague over at the White House, upon him walking away, asked him about Donald Trump's assertion today at Trump Tower that it was the Biden DOJ, it was Biden that was directing all of this that led to these 34 convictions, what his response was, he just turned and gave a grin. This is the difficulty here. When there is 300 million Americans on looking, and you have one man who spews out what are falsehoods and lies, and he may very well have the right to this appeal, right? And he may have very well legitimate grievances, but there are so many other things that he says. And on the other side of that, you have a president of the United States, Joe Biden, who is his opponent 5 months from now in the White House general election, who is in so many ways restricted in what he says, other than calling on Americans to trust the rule of law that has been implemented in this country for more than 250 years.
Let's go back to the moment we were all on air together. And Pat Berkey, my executive producer, said in my ear, I don't know that he intended for me to say it on the air, but he said there's a verdict. And I blurted out, there's a verdict. Vaughn, can you take me back to that moment? What did you know?
I knew that there was a verdict. We were outside, he threw it back to me, and I was like, but exactly what is this? I didn't know anything else. And that's when we got the note in that it was going to be 30 minutes from then when the actual 34 counts would be read. But that was the question, right? It was going to be up to that foreman to ultimately be the one to deliver the what everybody had agreed on as those 12 jurors unanimously. And it wasn't until I think Andrew jumped in when you were the one who has been so careful not to, issue tea leaves or read tea leaves throughout this, but you had said the quickness of which they came back at 4:30 p.m. led you to believe that this was going in a certain direction. So you informed me in real time as well.
Well, it just seemed clear to me, especially because they said they needed 30 minutes that to fill out forms that at the they had to have had some guilty verdicts, and only I knew from being a prosecutor, all you really need is one. So that note was a very good note. The surprise was it turned out that it's hard to see why it took them 30 minutes, because I thought it seemed unlikely that it would be all acquittals or all convictions, and but it turns out the 30 minutes was probably for some other reason. If I had to guess, I would say security concerns, because this is an unusual case. The Secret Service would need to be involved. The NYPD could be involved because of transportation of the jurors, the alternate jurors. I mean, that just seems like a normal aspect and something I've seen happen. That's pure speculation, but it obviously was an incredibly dramatic moment. I would say that just to the sort of political overtones of this, where you have Donald Trump running on a sort of, just like the election, I really won that. This is a trial. I really won this. It's just like this was unfair. So the election's rigged, the trial's rigged. For those of us who've been in court, so I'm looking at these three people who've been there every day, this is the downside of it not being televised or not at least having audio. My biggest first reaction the moment I first went to court was the judge was so impressive. I couldn't believe how calm and dispassionate he was about everything. And you just had this idea of this presence of an adult in the room. And that was what kept everything so in control.
Well, and that's what Trump's chafing against. I mean, he was an adult who was extraordinarily even-handed and fair, issuing objections during Stormy Daniels' testimony ahead of Trump's own legal team, and then sustaining them on their behalf. And his flashpoints of anger were against Todd Blanche in the opening statements, against Robert Costello as the defense's one witness. I mean, you can sort of count them on one hand.
Yeah, well, it was about propriety. The idea that this is a courtroom. And it's a place where facts and law and respect for the rule of law matters. And he could put aside all of the attacks on him, on the jurors, on his family, and understand his oath of office. And something I don't think Donald Trump will ever understand, which is that people act out of principle and they're not transactional beings, and that people actually understand this has nothing to do with politics or money.
Right.
It just has to do with the principles, and such a contrast of where we are in the country.
And it worked, if I may. We applauded the court officers in the NYPD as they left the scene last night because there was concern about... The reporters did, because without having an overly aggressive footprint, they secured that area. It was
incredible.
It was incredible. And folks were continuing able to walk and bike and drive down the street, Center Street, right there that went along the courthouse. There was that park across the street, the First Amendment Park, where there were folks from both sides that were able to come out and protest. And at no point was there any sense that anybody's First Amendment rights were being violated. The officers were there, they were responsive, they were kind, they were ready.
And every day
the process worked.
They were respectful. Every day we have to, a lot of us were showing up at 6 and 6:30 or earlier in the morning to queue, and there was members of the public there that some of them were problematic and loud and arguing and fighting for lines and spot. I never heard them once raise their voice. And then to get us all in, they had to go through 2 levels of security, and everything moved perfectly. I never heard one raised voice. It was incredible how they ran it.
Have you had a chance to process this? Having you probably, as a journalist, most familiar with the facts and the documents, and just sort of your body of reporting intersects probably with this trial more than anyone else's. Have you processed yet what you witnessed and what the result is?
I think I'm still thinking about it. I went back to the office today and cleaned. I'm kind of getting ready for another story on Monday morning. It's funny how journalists, I'm like, okay, next. But it's just incredible. I mean, it really is. It's, like when you think about the minutia that we had to listen to get to this absolutely incredible moment, and it really. I think though what strikes me when I think about it, and I'm going to come back to the judge, it was just how he handled it. I saw him first in the criminal trial against the Trump organization, and just how well he ran that trial. Donald Trump wasn't there, but to see it on another level, and I thought his moments of anger were so powerful because he reserved them for I thought the right moments. That's sort of when I'm thinking about it today. I'm just thinking about, I can't believe we actually got to the end and it worked. But and there wasn't any real incidents. I mean, it was just really well run.
I keep thinking, Harry Littman, about the things that we were wrong about, right? People didn't think the 12 jurors would last. They thought maybe we needed more alternates because we go through all of them. We didn't go through any of them. People thought there would be a hung jury. We were saying it was possible yesterday in the 4 o'clock half hour before we knew there was a verdict. That didn't happen. What is your sense? And I watched probably too much sports analysis, right? The minute the basketball or baseball game ends, you can say what went wrong. My Mets just had a team meeting, and so everyone's already saying, "Oh, it's a team meeting." That's why they're, maybe trials don't work that way. But what is sort of the post-trial analysis?
A few things. So I think to Sue's point, it's all true, and Merchan was very impressive, but there was something very sort of bare bones, straightforward, homely, you might even say, about the actual process in a dilapidated courtroom that really contrasts with the kind of royal airs that Trump has always tried to portray, which is part and parcel of taking himself from apart from the legal system. The main thing that occurs to me, it's maybe because, we're law guys and we've been in this for a long time, but I found it a really gratifying day. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, how will the American people process it, et cetera. To me, the rule of law has its place. We don't want it to be all pervasive. We don't want the law to be controlling barbecues and voting and work, et cetera. There's always been this latent risk, and we're not out of the woods with it, that somehow people will reject the legal principles that were vindicated. On the other hand, there was a latent risk that the principles themselves wouldn't be vindicated. All the things that everyone said is correct, and moreover, it happened in a hailstorm of Trump and Speaker of the House, real leaders coming down every day and screaming about this process, and everyone, Merchan, but the 12 and the attorneys kept their head down and just did it in a calm, straightforward way. It was exemplary, but on the other hand, I don't think transcendent. It was better for being just a straightforward, normal criminal law process. And he now, by the way, there's so many ways we're just beginning to process his change of status. But as a convict, there's going to be so many ways where he's in a grimy, system that he has to submit to, and he's just beginning to understand.
I think last time I renewed my passport might have been the last form I filled out where you're asked if you're a felon, and most people mindlessly, check no. He has to check yes. I mean, just take me through what he can and can't do now that he's a felon.
Well, there are certain things that, can he possess a gun? That's sort of once he is a felon, there is actually a federal statute that makes it illegal to possess a gun. As you noted, there are issues with respect to his being able to vote. There actually, if he gets some sort of sentence, and at the time that he's serving it, that may preclude him from voting, with the anomaly of he wants people to vote for him, but he will be the one person who may not be able to vote for himself. Obviously, it depends on what Judge Merchan does when he sentences him. But he
international
also
travel,
is going to,
right?
There could be. That's actually up to the judge to decide. What
it's up to countries. Many countries won't permit him to travel to them under their rules.
Wow.
So the other is he's going to submit to a report. So there will be a pre-sentence report, and he's going to go in, and that person is going to ask him everything about himself. He is going to have to answer all sorts of questions about his finances, his background, and writes up a huge report.
What's the purpose of that?
So the judge gets a report. Both sides will see it, and it gives a recommendation as to what the sentence should be. And that is based on a whole series of things, but it includes who is the offender and what are the offense characteristics. So remorse, recidivism.
Right.
The judge has to decide what kind of fine should be imposed. So to do that, you need to know about the financial wherewithal of the defendant. This is, by the way, this is standard for any defendant, that there is this process. And he will be subjected to that. And just to be clear, it's because of his conduct. I mean, it's not being imposed on him. He made a choice. He was given a trial, and the jury found that he did it. So all of this is something that every defendant who has made a choice, a poor one, and is found guilty is subjected to this.
Will the report inform Judge Merchan's decision about whether or not prison time is on the table?
About prison time, about the fine. Now, the judge does not have to follow it, the same way that the judge doesn't have to follow the state's recommendation or the defendant's recommendation. And with Judge Merchan, you can be sure he's going to make his own decision. But all of that is information that he gets. And the reason for having a separate body, so it's not just the state or the defense, is that there's an arm of the court that is actually that's independent, that is giving that analysis, so that the court doesn't have to worry about is he getting the right information. But it is tested.
All I keep thinking of, though, is so what Trump is going to show up? Like the guy that told Fox News, I hate flippers, or the guy that walks around and then takes the mocha test in front of any camera? I mean, what Trump is going to show up and take this and sit for this interview?
When does it happen?
Yeah, before July 11th. But we know what Trump is going to show up. This is the point where every lawyer tells his convicted client, okay, now go there and show you're repentant. For God's sakes, you're a convict. He's not capable of it. He's going to sit down in this grimy room and just continue to fulminate. That'll show up in the report. It's something that Merchan can take account of.
What is the state of acceptance of his fate on Trump's part?
Today was evidence of that. I was in Trump Tower in the atrium, and there was anything but remorse. Donald Trump is a fighter. I mean, I wouldn't say that this was somebody who was brimming with confidence or enthusiasm or joy.
Yeah, he didn't look like that yesterday.
That is not how I would describe Donald Trump this morning.
Right.
On May 31st.
Was Melania there?
Melania was not there.
No.
Ivanka was not there. Eric and Laura, they were standing off to the side. But I mean, look, he was just convicted, less than 24 hours ago, and you didn't see a lineup of Republican lawmakers. He was there isolated in front of those elevator doors. It was much different than, 8 years ago during the transition, when I was sitting watching those elevator doors for hours and hours as he had people go up and meet him and greet him up on the 26th floor.
Yeah.
And you see those folks there. We were guessing that most of them were Trump Organization employees based off of the way that they were dressed and where they were coming from inside the building included, but they were their little cheer squad. But other than that, it was more than 30 minutes of him referring to the bad people that did this to him, lashing out at Michael Cohen, but not by name. This was we called 2022 the revenge tour. I don't know what the next 5 months look like here, because this is somebody who has now been sullied repeatedly by the justice system, from the E. Jean Carroll defamation suit here earlier this year, the $350 million penalty coming from the Judge Ngoron and the civil fraud trial. So for him, this is just blow after blow here. And this was not somebody that, I'm used to seeing on the campaign trail this morning.
Harry Litman, thank you so much for all your coverage of the trial and for being here with us. Yeah. Everyone else sticks around. When we come back, we'll talk with another one of our new favorite friends and go-to experts on the trial. We've turned to him over and over again over the past couple months, someone who had a front row seat to the specific facts of this case. Former executive editor at the National Enquirer, Lachlan Cartwright, joins us. Plus, will the guilty conviction be the line in the sand for a small but critical part of the electorate? We'll ask that question. We'll look at whether there are enough voters who are now uncomfortable with the idea of having a criminal in the Oval Office to make a difference. Joining us at the table once again is the former executive editor with American Media Inc., special correspondent for The Hollywood Reporter. Lachlan Cartwright is back. Andrew Vaughn and Sue are still here. Lachlan, we could not finish out the week and this historic news event without bringing you back. I mean, I needed to talk to you when we saw what the 4 questions were and what the readback requests were. And I was dying to know, and you actually just answered in the break, but did you have a sense or a gut on how this was heading based on the specific chunks of testimony they wanted read back, especially Pecker?
Yes, as soon as we got that note saying they wanted the readback of David Pecker, my initial thought was, OK, they've come to a decision on the docs. They've looked at that paper and they've got there. But where they're now trying to get to is the underlying crime, which was this scheme to influence the 2016 election. And they needed to hear David Pecker's testimony again, which was, the first witness for a reason. And a month ago, as we sort of were all trying to remember back to them, because we've gone through so much since then. And the key indicators were not just that bit of testimony, the bit about the Trump Tower meeting, but also about Karen McDougal and her life rates and that key conversation with David Pecker. All those indicators came back to me in my New York Times magazine piece, where AMI was at the centre of this case. And leading up to it, even a year ago when I was down at court for the indictment, and everyone had said, it's Stormy Daniels, it's hush money. And I thought, if Stormy's in here, Karen McDougal has to be in that indictment. And then when I was reading through, it was Stormy, Karen and Dino. It was a reunion tour. I said that to you on the first time. It was the AMI reunion tour. And that was when I thought, I've got to write this piece. And I ran into Jake, the editor of the Times Mag at the ASMEs that same week, and pitched it to him. But again, that kind of thought process came back to me as the jury is at that moment, and they've decided about the docs, and to get the misdemeanor to the felony, they need to confirm this underlying plot. They need to put David Pecker and Donald Trump and Cohen all in this conspiracy, and they did.
Trump was convicted on 34 felony counts, not because of Michael Cohen or Stormy Daniels, who his lawyers savaged, but because of David Pecker, who his lawyers did not. What else does David Pecker know? Why is Trump being so nice to him?
I think that David Pecker and Donald Trump's relationship goes back many, many, many years. And while I would love to tell the viewers there's some bombshell vault of documents in Boca Raton, Florida, that I'm about to write a book about, I can't say that is the actual truth. But what I think is one of the most interesting twists about all of this that we've been talking about for weeks and weeks and weeks, David Pecker, who corrupted this media organization, who twisted and turned a tabloid news organization into a criminal enterprise, that was the reason that we're all here is because of the press, because of the likes of the Wall Street Journal, that first initial story before the election where the catch and kill phrase comes out for the first time, and no one really noticed it. It got swallowed up before the election because we're all still
Monday before the election, right?
It was just the days before the election, and we're all still talking about Access Hollywood, and so no one really noticed that initial story, and then the follow-up reporting by the Associated Press, by the New York Times, by the New Yorker, and these series of news organizations are all competing to land the Stormy Daniels story, and that really drove it home. And these stories kept appearing in different outlets, and prosecutors started noticing, and that's when Michael Cohen was raided that April. I remember sitting there thinking, OK, now we're at somewhere. This is confirming to me what I always thought when I was there, that something dodgy is going on. And this is, I walked out of court last night, I thought, my golly gosh, I not only have lived this, I've survived to tell the tale. And for me, it was a little sense of validation information that, I'm a little bit crazy, not as crazy as my mate said down the pub when I first was telling them something like this was going on. But it was a nice moment to me when I heard that first guilty, and then I heard it 34 more times. And I thought to myself, boom, the system worked. Judge Mershon, his court worked, that jury worked. And it was such a beautiful moment coming out last night. And I just thought, boom.
I have to say, I met Lachlan a few years ago, and I remember going out for drinks with you once, and he was telling me these stories, and you're just like, are you kidding me? Like, it almost didn't make sense. I'm sort of like, was worried about you.
You thought I was bonkers.
Yeah. Like,
you weren't the only one.
But Trump benefits from all of the other people thinking they're nuts. And I wonder what, I've likened it to the movie, the movie version of the book, The Firm. What is, again, like your moment where you go running out and become a source for your own media organization?
I think one of the defining moments is when Dylan Howard told me that he'd gone out to California, he'd interviewed a woman, she had a credible story about an affair with Donald Trump, and that her name was Karen McDougal. And I was like, Ripper, when are we going to run this story? What do you need from me? What are we doing? Oh, we're not running it. David Pecker has purchased this story and has killed it to help Donald Trump. And I just thought, where am I? In what world are we doing this? And then another series of events in the lead up to the election involving purchasing of supposed emails that came from Italian intelligence that we had to get translated right on the eve of the election, and getting that call from the Wall Street Journal and Lucas Elpert. And I just thought, this story needs to be in the public domain. This story deserves to be in the public interest. It stays before the election. And that's what I walked down outside of AMI and I said to Lucas Elpert, this is a catch and kill. And the reason I use that term is to give me some cover, because I knew that they would be looking for who the source was on the inside. What was interesting in the case, that comes up where Donald Trump and Michael Cohen say to David Pecker, well, there's someone inside. He says, no, there's no. Well, we've got this all kind of locked down. We're all good. Everything's in that safe that became my footrest that I had to then open up to get the document to give to the Wall Street Journal, and couldn't get that safe closed and was panicking that any moment Dylan Howard could come into my office. So, it's been a surreal few weeks.
Up next for us, is there a voter out there who will hear the dog whistle that is the guilty conviction of the Republican candidate for president and change their vote in November? We'll ask. Don't go anywhere.
What happens if he does get elected and all those charges are he's found guilty of? Do we want a president that wants to sit there with all the guilty charges against him, possibly going to prison, doing his oath, his duty while in prison?
He's going on trial for this and that and this and that. He's really the felon in charge instead of the commander in chief.
I don't think any person who has gotten close enough to being indicted for a felony should be anywhere near the presidency. It's just embarrassing.
Are we still capable of being embarrassed as a country? That is the question. Now that Donald Trump has been found guilty on 34 felony counts in the election interference hush money criminal trial against him, he becomes the first ex-president and presumptive major party nominee to be convicted on felony charges. These are the kinds of voters who could have an outsized impact in November's election. While there's belief that the ex-president's new criminal status could boost him politically with his own base as they continue to rail against the rule of law in America, the founder of Republican Voters Against Trump, Sarah Longwell, says this of yesterday's verdict, quote, "It won't be a public opinion earthquake, but in an election where inches will matter, this just created a new barrier for undecided swing voters voting for a convicted felon." Joining our conversation is the executive director of Republican Voters Against Trump, publisher of The Bulwark. Sarah Longwell's back with us. Sarah, you were the first person I wanted to talk to once this news sort of came through and ended up on the front page with huge banner headlines. And my question is, who do you hope sees this? Who's still open to news?
Look, the persuadable voters or the swing voters in the 2024 election are voters who sort of don't like either candidate very much. Sometimes we call them the double haters or the double doubters or the epochs on both their housers. But they're people, they are center right voters. Many of them are Trump voters, but they don't want to vote for Trump again. And in fact, just before I came on here, I was listening to a focus group that we're convening right now as we speak of two-time Trump voters who rate Trump as doing a very bad job. They view him unfavorably. And those are the people who we are trying to persuade to not vote for Trump in the 2024 election. And we asked them the impact of this verdict on how they were thinking about voting for Trump. And 5 of the 9 said it made them less likely to be willing to vote for Trump. 1 said it made them more likely, and 3 said it made no difference. And so I haven't done enough focus groups to know how it's going to impact people broadly, but I do take that sounds about right to me. For these voters who don't like Trump very much, because that's the thing about double haters. I always try to remind people we're calling them double haters because they don't like either candidate very much, but they don't actually hate Joe Biden. They really hate Donald Trump. They maybe aren't enthusiastic about Joe Biden. They maybe wish there was somebody else other than Joe Biden. But Donald Trump scares them. And so whenever there's something like this, a verdict where he has now been found guilty on 34 counts, he is a felon, that does raise the bar for these voters to say, I don't think I can get there on him. And so I'm hearing a lot of analysis that sort of dismisses the idea that it would make any difference. And I just think that's wrong. I think, like I said in that tweet, it's not an inflection point where it's going to change the entire trajectory of the race, but it will have a marginal impact on these marginal swing voters in an election that's going to be decided at the margins. And so I absolutely think that it matters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people are staring at, the wrong part of the portrait, right? They're staring at the people who were willing to go to the U.S. Capitol on January 6th to, quote, hang Mike Pence. Of course, those people are not moved by 34 felony convictions. Of course not. But if you look at the people that you're talking about, the people who used to have Trump flags in front of their house, who used to wear a MAGA hat to the grocery store, anecdotally, the evidence is everywhere that there are a lot fewer Trump flags than there were in 16 and 20, that there are a lot fewer red cap MAGA wearers outside of those who were willing to travel to Washington on January 6th. Can you talk to me about the moment that exists right now in terms of permission structures for for sort of the rule of law Republicans to say, hey, I'm out?
Yeah, so here's what happened is for a lot of these voters who liked Trump, who voted for him twice, their breaking point, when we make these ads for Republican voters against Trump, we make these testimonials. The number one reason we hear from people who voted for Trump twice and won't vote for him again is because of January 6th. It was a break glass moment for them, right? That's when they were out, they were done. It was a red line. And so, but one of the things that's been happening, right, is that as the sort of Republican apparatus has continued to downplay what happened on January 6th, right? You're seeing the circling of the wagons, people like Nikki Haley endorsing Donald Trump despite condemning what happened on January 6th, despite them understanding that Donald Trump was refusing to engage in the peaceful transfer of power and even fomenting a coup. They're still going ahead and saying, oh, yeah, we'll take him. And so some of those voters, seeing the entire Republican establishment sort of crawl back to Trump, they get pulled in that direction, too, pulled sort of home to the tribe. And what this conviction does is it helps reinforce for the ones who said, no, that was my red line, I'm out. Even as they're trying to sort of pull you back in, they say, no, this guy should not be anywhere near the White House. And I'll say the other thing about this trial, I'm glad it's over. I'm glad to see the conviction. I'm glad to see the accountability. But I do think the thing about the trial was that it did keep people looking backwards to some degree. The Stormy Daniels things have been litigated in the voters' minds for a long time. We need people to start looking forward in terms of what another 4 years of Trump means. And I think the added element of a convicted felon just helps underscore the criminality that hangs over everything that Donald Trump does and is one of the reasons he has no business being near the White House again.
Sarah, has the Biden campaign reached out to you? And if they asked for your advice and you gave them, 2 pieces of advice, what would it be?
Look, I think my biggest piece of advice is you need center-right surrogates. And you need surrogates in general. Look, I think it's not a secret that Joe Biden himself is maybe not the strongest messenger. And you need every Democrat right now. And at these moments, right, these moments when there is a chance to really hit Trump hard, go on offense, you need all your surrogates flooding the zone out there saying, This guy's a convicted felon. It is unacceptable. The American people don't want a convicted felon. Help the American people understand why this is such an important moment. That would be my biggest piece of advice, and especially reaching out to those on the center right who can help be surrogates in that regard as well.
When we come back, a stunning warning from one of America's preeminent historians, why Ken Burns broke decades of political neutrality to deliver a powerful and dire warning about the dangers we face right now to democracy, the dangers posed by Donald Trump. Ken Burns joins us right here at the table. Don't go anywhere.
The presumptive Republican nominee is the opioid of all opioids, an easy cure for what some believe is the solution to our myriad pains and problems, when in fact, with him, you end up re-enslaved with an even bigger problem, a worse affliction and addiction, a bigger delusion, James Baldwin would say, the author and finisher of our national existence, our national suicide, as Mr. Lincoln prophesies. Do not be seduced by easy equalization. There is nothing equal about this equation. We are at an existential crossroads in our political and civic lives. This is a choice that could not be clearer.
If you haven't sat and watched the whole thing and then rewound it and watched it again, do yourself a favor, treat yourself, and as soon as we get off the air, please do so. Everything that renowned historian Ken Burns had to say is a precious gift in this moment. So that was from a commencement address at Brandeis University on the 19th, about a week ago. It has exploded online since it was so eloquently and powerfully delivered last weekend. Burns explained why he sees right now this moment as a moment to suspend his long-standing commitment and attempt at neutrality. He implored those new graduates to remember that the most important political office is that of a private citizen. Vote, he said, urging them to deliver our nation from the other route, which threatens to engulf and destroy us. Joining us right now, the aforementioned Emmy Award-winning filmmaker and documentarian Ken Burns. I have your copy as you delivered it. I told you yesterday when I emailed you, I want to read the whole thing, and we'll try to do that. But first, tell me about this internal tussle about breaking your vow of neutrality.
I've been making films about American history. I have no interest in talking to one particular group or another. I'm interested in talking to all citizens. I have no interest in sort of polishing whatever political apple I might be attracted to at a particular time. I'm interested in telling true, honest, complicated stories. It's unafraid, as I said in the speech, of controversy and tragedy, but equally drawn to those moments that suggest an abiding faith in the human spirit, and particularly what this American experiment has been about in good and bad ways. And every once in a while, though, you sort of feel in your gut, from having experienced all of this undertow, what the stakes are. And the stakes now are as high as they could possibly be. It's an existential moment, as I said, and it is something that we have to pay attention to. And unfortunately, we are so preoccupied with argument, or dialectically preoccupied with one thing or the other, and we forget that we have to step back a lot of times. The despots know this, right? They've always known this. They don't respect the judicial system, so they can play both sides of it. We're still bound by codes of honor and say we turn it into a handicap. And in so doing, we cede a little bit of power to those despots. Remember, when we started our country, we're the only place on earth that said you would be a citizen, not a subject. Didn't apply to everybody. Not you, not black people, not recent immigrants, but it was the beginning. It was the foot in the door of this aspirational experiment that's been going on for 249 years. And we need to actually sort of remember what that's about. You know, Thomas Paine says this wonderful thing, that mankind discovers that the strength and power of despotism consists wholly in the fear of resisting it. And that's where I got called. I just finally went, I have to say something and speak directly. I still don't think I made a a choice to be for one thing or the other.
Yeah.
I was for us. That's what I was trying to do.
I mean, and I guess this is my question. The other route hasn't worked, and you seem to indict the binary, right? Red state,
Yes.
blue state. And it had an echo to President Obama's convention speech, right? We don't live in red America or blue America. There's one America. Was that on your mind, things that have broken through?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. To me, it's very spiritual and it's ancient. It's Old Testament. It's Ecclesiastes, which I was doing, that we forget that when we engage in this argument, it's always one thing or another. And what we know from our lives, our relationships, our children, our work, is that things are really complicated. There's undertow, there's confusion, there's consternation that we have at opposites, and we have to honor that. And I think we go into this saying, oh, it's just an easy thing. I think we've failed as media, that we were, 8 years ago, we had our cameras parked at the airplane hangar where he was going to arrive because we knew it was going to be a good train wreck. We knew it was going to be, if it bleeds, it leads. We knew it was going to be dramatic. And we've set up this kind of equivalency. So we have not invested the time in, say, for example, the accomplishments of the Biden administration. That is to say, given that equal time.
Totally.
We haven't said this may be the third most accomplished legislative accomplishments in 100 years. Obviously, FDR and LBJ are a little bit ahead, but this may be that. And so we have to, yes, and Obama is really strong at understanding that it's not just this argument. It's sometimes superseded by a reconciling force, which we have to bring at this moment.
Yeah.
This is not a question of Democrats or Republicans.
No.
This is the survival of our republic. If you like despots, dictators on day one, there's not a dictator who's ever given up power willingly.
This has been Primetime Weekend. I'm Nicole Wallace. Please tune into Deadline White House and all of our primetime shows weekdays on MSNBC.